My name is Rebecca Hale. I am 67 years old, a widow, and for the past 3 years, the only place that has felt alive to me is my mountain lodge in Aspen. My late husband, Richard, and I built our life around that home. Every beam, every window, every nail. It carried our fingerprints. 3 hours on the road had never felt heavy before, but that afternoon the drive stretched like a test. I carried one small weekend bag and the chipped ceramic cup Richard used every morning. It is cracked along the rim, but I have never thrown it away. That cup is my anchor. When I turned the bend and saw the roofline of the lodge against the pines, my chest loosened, the way it always did when Richard was alive. But when I pulled into the gravel drive, the sound of laughter floated out from the porch. Laughter that did not belong to me. I froze halfway up the steps. My son, Daniel, sat sprawled in the very chair his father had loved. The wooden rocker Richard sanded with his own hands one summer, the chair where he drank tea every morning. Daniel had one ankle thrown over his knee, a glass of red wine in his hand, his phone glowing in the other. Beside him, his wife Lydia crossed her legs like she was posing for a magazine photo, one manicured hand circling the rim of her glass. Her parents, Charles with his neat gray hair and Elaine with pearls tight around her neck, leaned back as though they had been born into this porch. 4 wine glasses, 4 bodies at ease. My throat locked because in a single glance I was standing in 2 times at once. Flashback, Richard's laugh one crisp morning, steam curling from the tea I had poured into his favorite cup. His hand rested on that same chair arm as he looked at me and said, "Becca, this will always be the spot where I wait for you to bring me tea." Back to now. My son filling that sacred space with a smirk. Daniel lifted his eyes to mine. He did not even flinch. His voice was calm, steady, practiced. "Mom, you are not allowed here anymore. This is their house now. It belongs to Lydia's parents." Every word landed like a stone. For a moment, the air thinned around me. I saw Richard's chair, Richard's porch, Richard's house. And my son, our only child, handing it away with a shrug, as if decades of sacrifice meant nothing more than another glass of wine. That line, "You're not allowed back," was the sentence that split my life into before and after. The thumbnail of my story is true. My son took my $4 million mountain lodge and gave it to his wife's family. He said, "It's theirs now. You are not allowed back." And do you know what I did? I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile, the kind people mistake for surrender. But in my heart, I had already written the ending, because the night they tried to move in, I had a legal surprise waiting. People call what I did that day silence or compliance, but I call it something else. I call it the day they would never forget. I tightened my grip on my weekend bag until my veins pressed against the skin. My lips held the smile. My eyes held something colder. And without a single raised voice, I let them believe they had erased me. That was the hook of my story. And if you stay with me, I will show you how quiet strength can redraw every boundary. Before I go on, let me say this. If you are listening right now and this story already pulls you in, take a second to subscribe, click the bell, and like this video. It helps more than you know. And in the comments, tell me where you are watching from. I want to know the faces behind the voices in this faceless world. Because what happened on that porch was only the beginning. And I promise you, by the time you hear the last page of this story, You will know why silence is sometimes the sharpest blade. The drive back to Denver felt longer than the 3 hours it usually took. The highway was quiet, but inside the car, the silence was even louder. No radio, no hum of Richard tapping the wheel the way he used to. Just me and the echo of Daniel's words. "You're not allowed here anymore. This is their house now." I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, the cracked ceramic cup rattling softly in the seat beside me. That cup has traveled with me on every trip since Richard died. He used it every morning. Tea, never coffee. The crack down its rim is thin, but when the light hits it, it looks like a fault line across my life. The road stretched endlessly, pine trees fading into concrete, mountains dissolving into flat plains. Each mile marker pressed deeper into me, like I was being pushed further from the only piece of Richard I had left. I tried to steady my breath, but memory insisted on barging in. Richard on the porch, his hands rough from sanding beams, telling me, "Becca, this place will outlast us. The lodge will hold our story. That promise once comforted me. Now it hurt like a betrayal." By the time the city lights of Denver appeared, I felt hollow, as if Daniel had scooped out my insides and left me only with the shell of a woman carrying a weekend bag. I pulled into my driveway, the same pale blue house Richard and I bought 40 years ago. It looked unchanged from the outside, but walking through the door was like stepping into a cave. Too still, too dark. I switched on the hall light. It flickered once before holding steady. The air smelled faintly of lavender cleaner, the kind I always used, but it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room. I set my bag down on the bench by the door and carried the chipped cup to the kitchen. I placed it on the table, next to the framed photograph of Richard smiling in front of the lodge with the lake behind him. His hair was sunlit, his grin easy. The kind of picture that could fool anyone into thinking life stayed that perfect. I stared at it and felt my chest tighten. My phone buzzed on the counter. For a second, I wanted to let it ring into silence, but it wasn't a call. It was a text from Daniel. "Just so you know, they'll move in permanently next weekend. Don't come back. No greeting, no explanation, just finality. A single line that carved me out of my own story." I sank into the kitchen chair, the one Richard always favored when he read the morning paper. I held the phone in my hand, staring at the words until they blurred. "Don't come back." I whispered it aloud. The sound of my own voice startled me. Thin, unfamiliar. The first sting was humiliation. My own child deciding I no longer belonged to what I had built. The second sting was grief, like Richard had died a second time. But beneath both came something steadier. A current moving underneath the wreckage. Determination. I reached for the cup, tracing the crack with my thumb. Richard never replaced it, even when I offered. He said, "A crack doesn't mean it's broken. It just means it survived." I closed my eyes and breathed. Survived. That word carried me through the silence of the kitchen. I could survive this too. I wanted to cry, but the tears refused to come. Instead, I felt my body grow heavier, like stone rooting me to the chair. My mind began to tally. The lodge deed, still in my name. The living trust Richard had insisted we sign years ago. The receipts of every repair I had made since his passing. I realized Daniel might think he had won by speaking louder, but I had the paperwork that whispered stronger. The clock on the wall ticked past 9. I hadn't eaten since morning, but food felt irrelevant. I poured myself hot water into the chipped cup and let the steam rise, though I never lifted it to my lips. It was ritual more than nourishment. The house remained silent, but I was no longer afraid of silence. Tonight, it was the weight I needed to anchor myself. I thought of Daniel as a boy, chasing leaves in the lodge yard, shouting for Richard to watch him climb the rocks. I remembered the way Richard had held my hand at his graduation, whispering, "We did well, Becca. He's going to be a good man." Those memories felt like they belonged to another family, a family that dissolved when greed sat down at my porch with a glass of wine. The text still glowed on my phone. I set it face down on the table. My reflection in the screen looked older, sharper, less forgiving. Maybe that was who I had to be now. I stood, carried the cup to the sink, and washed it carefully. I dried it with the dish towel Richard always left hanging crooked. I placed it back in the cabinet, top shelf, as though that small act restored order. I walked down the hall, past the photos on the wall. Weddings, birthdays, vacations, images that now seemed like postcards from a place I would never return. I paused at the doorway to my study. Richard's books still lined the shelves, his handwriting in the margins. I touched one spine and whispered to him, "I'm still here." And so is the lodge. When I finally climbed into bed, the house groaned with its usual nighttime sounds. The furnace kicking in, the faint creak of wood, the hum of the refrigerator. But I no longer heard them as empty. I heard them as witnesses. I closed my eyes and held on to the single truth that burned through the night. No one, not my son, not his wife, not her parents, had the power to erase me. No one has the right to take my name off the door of my own home. Morning came thin and gray, the kind of light that keeps a house undecided. I woke before the alarm because grief wakes you early. I padded to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set my chipped ceramic cup on the counter. The crack along its rim caught a strip of sun. I watered the basil on the sill, then moved down the hall with a spray bottle to tend the ferns. Routine steadied me. You can hold a plant without asking it for anything. I carried my tea to the living room and set the saucer beside Richard's empty chair. The rocker faced the window the way he left it, angled to watch the street and the sky. I never sit in that chair. I dust it. I keep it oiled. I leave it ready, as if a good man might walk through the door and ask for his place. I took the sofa and pulled a throw over my knees. The house felt like a paused song. I opened the blinds. A delivery truck rattled past. I took a sip and let the heat settle me. I am a woman who ran books for 30 years, who nursed a husband through chemo, who learned how to sleep alone. I can do mornings. Still, the quiet has teeth. By 9, I had watered the philodendron and wiped the counters. I scrolled through recipes I never make and folded dish towels the way my mother taught me. I opened the cabinet and touched the box where I keep our documents. Deed, insurance, the living trust. The tea cooled while the past warmed. Memory keeps books, and mine arrives by invoices. Tuition. I saw Daniel at 18 under a graduation cap, grinning at me in the gymnasium's bad light. The aid office called to say there was a gap. I wrote a check I could not really afford and said it was a gift. Richard squeezed my hand and said, "You do love to make a path for him." I answered, "That is what mothers do." He kissed my temple and added, "You spoil him." Wedding. Lydia's family wanted chandeliers and a view. I told myself once in a lifetime and paid the deposit before anyone asked me to. Daniel hugged me and said, "You are the best," then checked his phone before the embrace ended. Richard looked at the invoice and murmured, "You spoil him too much, Becca." I smiled like it was a joke and filed the receipt in a folder labeled Joy. Car. Daniel's transmission failed the winter after Richard died. He called at midnight, voice tight with worry. I drove him to work for a week, then signed for a used SUV safer in the snow. "I will pay you back," he promised. I said, "It is fine." He said, "You are a lifesaver," and I believed him. The payments never came, but I kept the paperwork like a lullaby. Condo. Their landlord sold the building. Lydia cried on speakerphone. Daniel said they had to move fast. I wired the deposit site unseen and told myself this was how families avoid the cliff. When I hung up, I looked at Richard's chair and whispered, "I am trying." The room did not answer. I watered the pothos and set the can down. My hands were steady. The truth arrived without trumpets. I thought if I gave enough, he would remember that family is not a bill. I was wrong. The sentence did not crush me. It cleared the fog. Relief came first, thin and clean. Then anger, but not the noisy kind. This was a straightening of the back. I stood in the doorway and looked at our history. The photos on the mantle. The chair I refused to sit in. The cup that refuses to break. I had been writing checks to keep the idea of us alive, and in the process, I had been overdrawing my dignity. A notification blinked on my phone. I let it pass. In the study, I opened the file drawer and took out the trust binder. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters like a woman learning a new alphabet. Rebecca Hale Living Trust. A promise we made when love was medicine and foresight a form of tenderness. I brought the binder to the table and set it beside the cup. I thought about the lodge and the morning light that quilts the floorboards there. I thought about Daniel's voice on the porch and Lydia's satisfied smile and the way Charles nodded at me like I was staff. I thought about the text that told me not to come back. I sat and placed both hands flat on the table. The wood was warm from the sun. I said the word out loud, tasting how new it felt in my mouth. Number, not a scream, not a speech, a boundary drawn in plain ink. I am not the storming type. I am the ledger type, the list maker, the woman who keeps a house with steady hands. I can be soft and still say no. The world once told me those things could not share a roof. The world was mistaken. I rinsed the cup and hung the dish towel straight. The morning had begun empty. Now it felt like a clearing. The first space where a new choice could fit. It was Tuesday night when the lodge cameras lit up on my tablet. I had installed the small system myself last year, more for raccoons than people. But now the screens carried a different weight. At 8:45, I tapped the feed from the living room. The picture was grainy, but clear enough. Daniel and Lydia had come back to the mountain lodge without telling me. Daniel paced near the fireplace, his hands moving in sharp lines. Lydia sat on the sofa with her legs tucked under her, a glass of water balanced carefully, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. "They have nowhere to go, Daniel," she said. "My parents are drowning. They lost the house. They can't afford rent in the city. You know that." "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But this is not the way." She leaned forward, pressing her point. It is the only way. Look around you. This place sits empty most of the year. Your mom doesn't even stay here. It is selfish to keep it locked up when people we love are desperate. My chest tightened as I watched. Richard and I had built that fireplace together, stone by stone. To hear it called wasted space felt like hearing our life called a mistake. Daniel stopped pacing. She's not going to agree, Lydia. She'll fight. Lydia's voice sharpened. She won't. She doesn't know how. She gives in. She always has. College tuition? She paid it without blinking. The wedding? She signed the checks. The car, the condo, everything. She's trained us to expect yes. Daniel's shoulders dropped. He sat beside her, his voice low. Maybe this time is different. She looked at him hard. It's not. She's a widow, Daniel. Alone. She won't risk losing you. You're all she has. She'll swallow her pride. She always does. The word struck deeper than I expected. Alone. Widow. Swallow her pride. They had reduced me to an equation. Grief plus need equals surrender. Daniel rubbed his face. What if she calls a lawyer? What if she locks us out? Lydia shook her head. She won't. She doesn't think that way. She thinks family first, even if it kills her inside. We just need to be firm. Tell her it's permanent. My parents deserve this. After all they've done for us, I wanted to speak to the screen, to remind them of what I had done for them, of who built the life they stood inside. But the camera only listened. Daniel whispered something, and the microphone barely caught it. She'll hate me if we do this. Lydia laid a hand on his arm. Not if you frame it as helping. We're giving them stability. Your mom has more than she needs. She'll understand. Eventually. He nodded, but his face told a different truth. His jaw was tight, his eyes restless. Guilt was a weight he wasn't built to carry. I closed the tablet slowly. The house around me was silent, but inside, two worlds clashed. One was the part of me that still saw Daniel as a boy needing shelter. The other was the woman who had been told not to come back to her own door. For a long time, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the chipped cup. The steam had faded, but the outline of Richard's hand seemed to hover around the handle. I could almost hear his voice saying, "You spoil him too much, Becca." And maybe I had. Maybe every yes I gave had paved the road to this betrayal. Yet Lydia's words clung. Her parents had lost everything. They were desperate. I pictured Charles, stiff and polite on my porch, and Elaine with her pearls trembling slightly as she held her glass. Were they victims of bad luck or architects of entitlement? Did need excuse trespass? It was a moral knot. If they truly were homeless, if despair had pushed them to Daniel's doorstep, what kind of woman was I to stand guard at my own? Could compassion and self-respect survive in the same breath? The easy path was the one Lydia predicted. Surrender. Let them stay. Tell myself it was generosity. The harder path was the truth. This was not about shelter. It was about control. They had chosen force, not request. They had declared ownership, not asked for help. I pressed my palm against the table, steadying myself. For years, I believed love meant sacrifice without boundaries. Tonight, watching that feed, I saw the flaw. Sacrifice without respect breeds entitlement, not gratitude. The knot did not untangle, but I felt the pull of clarity. Lydia might believe I would fold. Daniel might want to believe it too. But belief does not change law, and law was where I would stand. The question lingered, though. If I deny them, am I cruel? If I allow them, am I erased? The camera had shown me more than their plan. It had shown me their justification, and it forced me to ask what kind of justice I believed in. I stood finally, the floorboards creaking under my weight. My answer was not yet formed, but my resolve was. The lodge was not a vacant property. It was memory, labor, love, survival. You do not hand those over like spare keys. I walked to the window, pulled back the curtain, and looked at the dark street. Somewhere in that night, my son believed I would bend again. Somewhere, Lydia rehearsed her certainty that compassion meant surrender. But in this quiet house, with Richard's picture watching, I allowed myself the first dangerous thought of all. This time, they might be wrong. Downtown smelled like rain on hot pavement the morning I carried the binder into Margaret's office. Her nameplate still read Margaret Cole, attorney at law, the same brass I had stared at with Richard when we first signed our papers years ago. The waiting room had a ficus that had outlived 2 recessions and a stack of magazines no one reads. I sat for a minute to smooth my breath, my tote at my feet. Inside the tote was the chipped ceramic cup. I do not take it places, but I took it today. A small weight to remind me who I am. Margaret opened her door with a half smile that meant business. We have been friends since college. We survived cafeteria coffee and first jobs together. Her friendship is warm. Her legal mind is colder than a scalpel. "Becca," she said, ushering me in. "Let's see what we are working with." I placed the binder on the mahogany desk and opened to the tabs. Deed, trust, insurance, taxes. She put on reading glasses and read in a silence that felt like shelter. Pages turned. Pens scratched notes. She nodded once, slow and certain. "This trust is steel," she said. "Title to the lodge is properly vested in the Rebecca Hale Living Trust. You are the trustee. You hold the authority to exclude anyone who is not a guest. Your late husband signed as co-grantor. His interests merged into yours by design. The documents are clean. Relief moved through my ribs like a new breath. I did not smile. I only pressed my palm flat on the binder and waited. Margaret continued, brisk and kind. "We will prepare a certification of trust and record a memorandum with the county, so any officer who runs the parcel gets instant clarity. We will send formal notice to Daniel, to his wife Lydia, and to her parents, Charles and Elaine, that they have no right to occupy. Certified mail, return receipt. We will include a no trespass warning. If they enter, you may call the sheriff and ask for removal under criminal trespass. You will not change locks while anyone is inside. You will not touch their property. We are immaculate, so they cannot claim harassment." I nodded. The rules steadied me. I have always done well with rules. She set her pen down and looked over the frames on the wall at me, not as a lawyer now, but as the woman who once brought me soup the day Richard started chemo. "The law will hold," she said, "but the law is not where your son will fight. He will fight in your chest." I stared at my hands. They were steady, but my throat was not. "He will tell you you are alone," she said. "He will say you are choosing strangers over family. He will mention holidays and future grandchildren. He will say you are unkind. He will try to make your heart override your signature. That is the only battlefield where he has a chance." I slid my tote closer with my shoe, feeling for the outline of the cup. My fingers found the curve of the handle through canvas. I did not pull it out. I just held the idea of it. "What do I say?" I asked, "when he says those things?" "You say it once, and then you say it again as many times as needed." she said. You say, I love you. The answer is no. This property is trust property. I will not discuss it further. Repeat the sentence. Do not explain. Do not defend. Do not bargain. She leaned forward. Silence is not surrender if it protects a boundary. It is a tool I let that settle. Silence. A tool. I had used silence to avoid conflict. Now I would use it to draw a line. Margaret flipped another tab. We will also create a log. Save every text, every voicemail. Write down dates and times of conversations. If they show up again, call the sheriff, then call me. And Becca, if you feel yourself weakening, call me before you call anyone else. I met her eyes. I will. She softened. Grief rewires us. It makes yes feel like the only way to keep people close. But proximity purchased by surrender is not closeness. It is control. I heard Richard in that sentence, the way he used to tease me after I wrote another check. You spoil him, Becca. Back then, I called it love. Maybe I still do. A little. I looked at the emboss on the binder. The letters were raised enough to trace. I used to think love meant saying yes, I said. The words surprised me by how even they sounded. Now I think love needs a line. Maybe love is the line. Margaret smiled with her eyes, not her mouth. That sounds like a woman learning to keep what she has built. She stood and pulled a short stack of papers from the printer. Sign here to authorize me to act on behalf of the trust with third parties. I will file today. By week's end, the record will be public. Post a small sign at the lodge. Private property, trust estate. No trespassing under Colorado Revised Statute. It is not required, but it helps the deputies. I signed where she pointed. My signature held steady. She slid the copies into a folder, then closed the binder and patted the cover like a doctor closing a chart. One more thing, she said. Expect a performance. When people lose leverage, they raise volume. Do not mistake volume for authority. I exhaled a small laugh that had no humor but some relief. I have heard plenty of volume. And you are still here, she said. Bring that cup of Richard's when you need courage. The one you think I do not know about. I blinked. She had seen it once at my house, years ago. I nodded. It helps. She walked me to the door. You are not cruel, Becca. You are clear. There is a difference in the hallway. I paused to look at my reflection in the glass. Same face. New, set to the shoulders. I tightened the strap of my tote and felt the weight of the cup again, ordinary and holy at once. Outside, the sky had opened into a pale blue that looked almost tender. I stepped into it with my folder and my plan. The lodge was more than boards and stone. It was memory and labor, and the part of me that refused to be erased. The law would guard the door. My quiet would guard the rest. I used to think love meant saying yes. Now it means drawing a line and keeping it. I found myself knocking on Ethan Miles's door 2 days after Margaret armed me with law. He lived 3 houses down, in a low ranch with a white mailbox that still bore the scratches of a winter storm. Ethan had been a soldier once. Now he worked as a security systems engineer. More than that, he was a man who owed me a debt he never forgot. Years ago, when a pipe burst in his basement and left him ankle-deep in freezing water, I had called a plumber I trusted and refused a dime for it. He never let it go. When the door opened, he stood there in jeans and a t-shirt, glasses sliding down his nose, the glow of 3 computer screens still caught in his eyes. Rebecca, he said, smiling carefully. Everything all right? That depends, I answered. I need your help with a project. He stepped back to let me in. His living room looked like the inside of a server rack. Cables, routers, soldering kits spread across a workbench. The hum of electronics filled the air like a second heartbeat. I sat in the chair he gestured to and waited for the question I knew was coming. "What kind of project?" he asked, folding his arms. "The kind where a house needs teeth," I said quietly. "Not to bite, just to keep people from thinking they own it when they don't." His eyebrows lifted, then settled into a grin. "Now you've got my attention. Which house are we talking about?" "My lodge," I said. "The one Richard and I built in Aspen. My son thinks he can give it away." Ethan whistled low. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "All right. Tell me what you want the lodge to do." I hesitated. "I don't want it to be a haunted house. I don't want to scare people for sport. I just want it to defend itself. I want anyone who steps inside without my permission to feel unwelcome enough to leave. I need the house to speak when I can't be there." Ethan nodded slowly, already sketching diagrams in his head. "We can do cameras, discreet, with remote feeds, motion sensors tied to lights that strobe hard enough to disorient, speakers that broadcast warnings, legal code, sheriff's department references, plumbing triggers to open faucets and showers. And if you want atmosphere, I can program footsteps or door creaks. It'll feel like the house is awake." The phrase lodged in me. Awake. The lodge had felt like it was sleeping since Richard passed. Maybe it was time it learned to stir. "I don't want it cruel," I said. "I don't want it mean. Just capable. Like me." He tilted his head, studying me. "You've always been capable, Rebecca. You just forgot it." I smiled faintly, my fingers brushing the rim of the chipped cup tucked in my tote. "Then maybe the lodge can remind me." We drove up together that weekend. Ethan's SUV packed with gear. Small black cameras, rolls of LED light strips, a stack of motion sensors no bigger than smoke alarms, and a tablet that could run it all. The road curved through pines heavy with late summer dust. I gripped the wheel, remembering the last time I'd pulled into the drive to see Daniel lounging in Richard's chair. My stomach tightened, but I kept going. When we arrived, Ethan stepped out and took a long look. "It's a fine place," he said. "Let's make sure it stays yours." Inside, the air still carried cedar polish. I moved through the rooms while Ethan unpacked, tracing the outlines of the life Richard and I had built. The mantel we carved initials into. The kitchen drawer that always stuck in damp weather. Ethan followed, setting devices in corners, testing angles. "This one covers the porch," he explained, holding a small camera. "Anyone sets foot here, you'll see it on your phone in real time. Over there, motion sensor. When it trips, lights will flash red and blue, alternating, mimics police strobes. No one stands still under that." In the kitchen, he rigged the faucets. When the sensor tripped, water roared with startling force, splashing stainless steel. Upstairs, he placed a projector to cast a tall, shifting shadow on the hallway wall. "Doesn't matter if you know it's fake," he said. "Your body still reacts." Finally, he opened the tablet. "Here's your control. You can run it from Denver. Cameras, lights, sounds, everything. And there's a closed backup system, so they can't just flip a breaker." I stood in the entryway as he tested. The lights strobed, sharp enough to leave spots dancing in my eyes. A voice boomed through the speakers, calm and firm. Unauthorized entry. Colorado Revised Statute 18-4-502. Leave immediately. The faucets roared. Footsteps echoed from hidden speakers. The projector threw a shadow that moved like someone pacing. Ethan shut it down and grinned. Now your house has a brain, and maybe a little attitude. I looked around, heart beating steady. The lodge looked the same, rug straight, curtains drawn, but it was different now. It was not just wood and stone. It was aware. It could answer when I could not. Quietly I said, I don't want the lodge to be an echo of fear. I just want it to know how to protect itself. Like me. I'm learning to protect myself again. Ethan nodded. Sometimes that's all defense is. A reminder that you're not helpless. We packed up as the sun dipped low, copper light pooling over the lake. I stood on the porch, watching the water shift, the mountains behind it holding steady like witnesses. Richard used to sit here, cup of tea in hand, telling me the lodge would outlast us both. Now it would do more than outlast. It would defend. As we locked the door, I slid the chipped cup from my tote and held it for a moment. See, Richard? I whispered. She's got teeth now. And so do I. The house behind me stood silent, but not sleeping. Awake, alert, waiting. The house was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that presses in like a weight. Denver's streets hummed faintly outside, but inside my kitchen, the only sound was the tick of the clock above the stove. 10, then 11, then past midnight. I brewed tea, though I knew I would not finish it. The chipped cup sat on the table beside a yellow pad of paper and a pen that had belonged to Richard. I had avoided this ritual for 3 years. Writing to him. The idea felt foolish, childish even. He was gone. Words could not bridge that distance. But tonight I needed a voice to hear mine, even if it was only paper. I turned on the small lamp by the table. The shade gave off a soft amber glow that fell into a pool of light across the pad. Everything else in the room dissolved into shadow. I sat, pen in hand, staring at the blank sheet. My fingers trembled when I finally began. Richard, I wrote, and then paused. Just his name made my throat tighten. I forced myself to keep going. Richard, tonight I did something I have avoided for too long. I said no to Daniel. I told our son that the lodge is not his to give away. He looked at me as if I were a wall he could push through. But this time the wall did not move. The pen scratched steady, though my hand shook when I formed the word no. The ink blotted, slightly, leaving the letters darker than the rest. I stared at it, heart pounding. That small word looked larger than any signature I had ever given. I continued. They do not see me as a mother anymore, Richard. To them, I am a wallet. Every check I wrote, college, wedding, condo, car, I told myself it was love. I told myself it would keep them near. But tonight, I saw it clearly. It was not love they saw. It was currency, and they expected the lodge to be just another transaction. But it isn't. It's us. It's the mornings you sat on the porch chair waiting for me to bring tea. It's the wood you sanded by hand. It is the place where grief and peace still meet. A tear slipped down before I could stop it, darkening the margin. I set the pen down and pressed my palms flat on the table until the trembling eased. The clock ticked on, unbothered. I picked up the pen again. Tonight, I also armed the lodge. With Ethan's help, she has eyes and ears now. Lights that flash, voices that speak the law, faucets that roar awake. She will not be taken quietly. Neither will I. It felt strange, Richard, like giving the house a mind of its own. But maybe that's what I needed. A reminder that walls can protect, not just shelter. that I must protect myself too. I stopped there, pen hovering. My breath slowed. The lamplight reflected off the teacup's crack, a thin line running from rim to base like a scar. It had survived a fall, but it still held liquid. I touched it gently, as if it could understand. Then I wrote the last lines. If you were here, you would tell me not to bend so far that I break. I can almost hear you saying it in that soft way of yours, a warning wrapped in kindness. I am trying, Richard. I am learning how to stop bending. I am learning how to stand. The lodge will stand too. I signed only with my initial R. That felt right. A signature is for others. An initial is for the heart. For a long moment, I simply looked at the page. The ink glistened under the lamp, and the word no seemed to glow. My hand ached from the grip. My shoulders sagged, but my chest felt lighter. I folded the letter slowly, each crease sharp, deliberate. Then I rose and carried it to the hallway closet. Inside, on the top shelf, was the old leather album Richard and I had filled with photographs from our first years at the lodge. I slid the folded paper inside the back cover, between pages that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I whispered, "It will stay here with you." Closing the album, I placed it back, the weight of it pressing into the shelf as if to anchor me. When I returned to the kitchen, the lamp still cast its amber glow, and the clock still marked seconds with indifferent precision. I turned the light off, and the room sank into darkness, except for the faint outline of the cup on the table. I carried it with me to bed, holding it carefully as though it were the fragile proof of everything I refused to lose. Lying under the quilt. The letter's words replayed in my head. Not anger, not vengeance, just the truth I had hidden from myself for too long. Saying no was not cruelty. It was survival. It was love, finally shaped with a boundary. The silence of the house felt different now. Not heavy, but steady. I realized I had written more than a letter to a husband. I had written a promise to myself. No one has the right to erase my name from the door of my own home, not even my son. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening, just as the sun slipped behind the Denver skyline and turned the windows into mirrors. I knew before I picked it up who it was. Daniel's number glowed across the screen like a warning light. For a moment, I let it buzz, hand hovering. Then I pressed answer. "Mom," he said without preamble. His voice carried that clipped tone, the one he used when he had already decided how the conversation would end. "We're moving into the lodge Saturday. With or without you." I drew in a breath, slow, even. The chipped cup was in front of me on the kitchen table, half filled with tea gone cold. My fingers wrapped around it as if it might steady me. "Daniel," I said, "you don't own what you didn't build." He snorted softly. "I'm not doing this for me. Lydia's parents need a place. They've lost everything. You have space? They don't. It's common sense, common sense." He said it like charity was a line item, like my life was a ledger to be balanced. "Common sense doesn't erase a deed," I replied. "The lodge is in trust. It's mine." He shifted gears fast, like he always did when logic blocked him. "Mom, you're older now. Alone. You hardly go up there anymore. Why cling to something that just sits empty? What's the point?" I felt heat rise in my chest, but my voice stayed calm. "The point is, it's mine to decide. Not yours." He pressed harder. "Dad would have wanted us to use it. He always said family comes first." That was when the silence fell. Heavy, thick, stretching across the line. My knuckles whitened around the cup. "Do not," I said slowly. Speak for your father." For a moment, neither of us breathed. The ticking of the wall clock filled the space between us. Daniel recovered first, his voice sharper now. "You're being selfish." I almost laughed at the word, selfish. After decades of giving until my hands were empty, after paying every bill, every deposit, every emergency, the word landed like an insult flung in ignorance. "I gave you college," I said quietly. "I paid for your wedding when you couldn't. I bought your first car when yours broke down. I wrote a check for the condo deposit without asking a question. That was not selfish. That was love. But love is not a license to steal." He raised his voice. "This isn't stealing. It's family. Family share. Family sacrifice." I answered with the calm he hated most. "I provided for you, Daniel." I did not provide for them. Lydia's parents are her family, not mine. I barely know them. Silence again, the kind that grows sharp at the edges. Then he tried a new angle. "If you fight this, you'll lose. We'll move in next weekend, and there's nothing you can do about it. We're already packing. You can't stop us." I let his words hang, let them echo until they shrank to the size they deserved. Then I said simply, "Yes, I can." He sputtered. "You think you can stand in our way?" "I don't need to stand in your way," I said, my tone level, final. "The law already does." His voice climbed, desperate now. "Don't do this, Mom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll embarrass yourself." I felt the strangest relief. For years, I had feared that. Embarrassing myself, losing his approval, losing the last thread that tied me to Richard. But sitting there with the phone pressed to my ear, I realized something. The embarrassment was his, not mine. "I'm done talking about this," I said. My hand was steady now, my chest unclenched. "You're not in charge anymore," he shouted. "Not over me. Not over this." But I didn't rise to meet his anger. I didn't plead, didn't argue, didn't soften. I simply pulled the phone from my ear and pressed the red button. The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen for a long moment, the faint reflection of my face caught in the glass. My heart was steady, my breathing even. It was such a small act, really. A click, a choice. But it felt monumental. For the first time in our lives, I ended the call first. I set the phone down beside the chipped cup. Steam no longer rose from the tea, but the air in the kitchen felt charged, alive. The walls seemed to breathe differently. I whispered to myself, small maybe. But I took my power back. I sat there, letting the silence stretch. No apology, no backtracking, no rush to reopen the wound. Just the steady quiet of a woman who had finally said no and meant it. The clock ticked on. The house settled. Outside, a car passed and faded into the night. I lifted the cup, took a sip, and smiled faintly at the bitter taste of cold tea. Even that felt like a reminder. Some things grow bitter if you let them sit too long. Some things you drink anyway, because they teach you not to wait. For years, I had let Daniel set the terms. Tonight, I set my own. I folded my hands around the cup and leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. The paint needed touch-up. The light fixture could use a new bulb. Small things, fixable things. But this, the boundary I had drawn, was not small. And it was not fixable in his favor. It was final. It was Thursday evening when the knock came. Sharp, hurried, insistent. The kind of knock that carries anger before a word is spoken. I knew it was Daniel before I opened the door. I hesitated with my hand on the knob. breathing in the faint smell of the stew I had left simmering on the stove. Then I pulled the door wide. Daniel stood there on the porch, his shoulders tight, jaw clenched. Lydia was beside him, arms folded across her chest, her perfume sharp in the winter air. They looked like an army of two, prepared for battle. "Mom," Daniel began, voice clipped, "we need to talk." He didn't ask. He declared. I stepped back, allowing them into the entryway. The air grew heavy the moment the door shut. Lydia glanced around with a practiced smirk, as though she were already measuring the space to see how she could improve it. Daniel didn't waste time. This has gone far enough. Either you stop fighting us on this, or you'll never see us again. No holidays, no grandkids, nothing. The words landed like stones, each one aimed with precision. For years I had dreaded that exact threat, the cutting off, the exile. It was the fear that had kept me writing checks and biting my tongue. But hearing it out loud now, in my own home, it sounded less like a threat and more like blackmail. I looked at him, then at her, then back again. My hands stayed loose at my sides. My voice came out calm, even. "Family," I said slowly, "does not take property hostage." For the first time that night, Daniel blinked. Lydia's lips pressed into a line. The silence that followed felt thick as wool. "You're twisting this," Daniel said finally. His voice had softened, but the edge was still there. "We're just trying to build a future. To give Lydia's parents stability. Isn't that what family does?" I tilted my head. Stability doesn't come from stealing someone else's foundation. If you wanted help, you could have asked. Instead, you demanded. That's not family. That's ransom. His face flushed. Lydia shifted beside him, clearly frustrated that I hadn't crumbled. "You don't understand what we're carrying," she said sharply. "My parents lost everything. They have nowhere else to go. You're sitting on a $4 million lodge, using it a handful of weekends a year. And we're the selfish ones?" Her words stung because they carried truth, but only a fragment of it. I met her gaze evenly. I understand loss. I buried my husband. I understand emptiness too, Lydia. I live with it every day. But I do not confuse generosity with surrender, and I will not confuse need with entitlement. Daniel stepped closer, towering now, his shadow long across the floor. "So that's it? You're choosing a house over us?" I felt my pulse steady, not race. "No," I said. "I'm choosing dignity over manipulation." There's a difference, he exhaled through his nose. Sharp, angry. "If you keep this up, don't expect us back. Don't expect calls. Don't expect anything." His words echoed in the entryway like cold wind. For a moment, my throat tightened, the old reflex wanting to plead, to bargain. But I stood still, grounded by something deeper than fear. "Then that's your choice," I said quietly. "But don't dress it up as mine." We stared at each other. Seconds stretched long. Lydia shifted first, breaking the silence. She tugged Daniel's sleeve, her voice low, urgent. "Let's go." Daniel didn't move at first. His eyes stayed locked on mine, waiting for me to flinch, to soften, to retreat. But I didn't. I held his gaze until it was his that broke. He turned sharply, pulling the door open so hard it rattled on its hinges. The cold air rushed in. Lydia brushed past me, muttering under her breath. Daniel followed, his footsteps heavy, deliberate. From the threshold, I watched them walk down the porch steps, across the driveway, and back into their car. He didn't look back. She didn't either. The engine roared, tires screeched, and then they were gone. taillights bleeding red into the dark. I stood there, the door still open, winter air spilling into the house. The wooden threshold beneath my feet felt solid, grounding, almost symbolic. For years, I'd crossed doors like this as though I were the one begging entry into their lives, their approval, their fleeting gratitude. Tonight, I realized the truth. This was my door, my threshold, and I had the right to decide who crossed it. I stepped back, pulled the door closed gently, and leaned against it. The house exhaled around me, warm air rising from the vent at my feet, carrying the scent of the stew. They had tried to make me believe that family could be bartered, that love could be negotiated like property. But standing there, I understood the echo line as clearly as if Richard himself had whispered it. Family does not take property hostage. The silence in the entryway was not empty. It was steady, resolute. I whispered, almost to myself, I just stepped through a threshold, and I'm not going back. The words tasted final, but not bitter. They tasted like strength. I carried the chipped cup from the table into the living room and sat in Richard's old chair, the one Daniel had occupied at the lodge. I set the cup down on the side table and folded my hands in my lap. My heart slowed. My breathing eased. For the first time in years, I felt not small, not erased, but whole. And outside the door, the world could rage and threaten all it wanted. Inside, I had already chosen. Saturday arrived like a weight on my chest. I was in my Denver study before dawn, the chipped cup warm in my hands, the tablet screen already open. The lodge's cameras fed back in sharp clarity. Every angle I had learned to memorize. Porch, entryway, living room, upstairs landing. Ethan, my neighbor, had called the system teeth. I just thought of it as armor. At 1:57 p.m., the feed lit up. A dark SUV rolled into the gravel drive of Aspen Lodge, pine branches shivering in its wake. I set the cup down, steadied my breathing, and watched. Daniel climbed out first, his stance already one of ownership. He opened the hatch with the casual motion of a man who believed nothing stood in his way. Lydia stepped out next, sunglasses perched high in her hair, barking small commands like a foreman at a job site. Her parents, Charles and Elaine, emerged more slowly. Charles hauled 2 rolling suitcases, his shoulders squared as if to claim territory. Elaine clutched a floral overnight bag, lips pursed tight, scanning the porch as if she were surveying land she now possessed. "Bring the big one inside first," Lydia ordered, pointing toward the door. Daniel nodded, already hefting another bag. They mounted the porch steps together. Elaine was the first to place a hand on the doorknob. That was the trigger. The porch light snapped to strobe. Inside, the entryway fixtures erupted in harsh, alternating flashes. Red, white, blue. Charles froze mid-step. Elaine gasped, jerking her hand back as though she'd touched fire. Then the voice activated. Calm, authoritative, threaded through every speaker. Attention. Unauthorized entry. Colorado Statute 18-4-502. Second-degree burglary. "Leave immediately," Elaine screamed. Her bag slipped to the porch, spilling a scarf across the planks. Charles grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but Daniel barked, "Ignore it. It's just her scare tactic." He shoved the door open, dragging the first suitcase inside. The cameras showed him stepping into the living room, and the system responded. The faucets in the kitchen roared to life, water gushing like broken pipes. Upstairs, the projector sent a shadow pacing along the landing, tall and unsteady, as if someone waited just beyond sight. The speakers layered in footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the stairwell. Elaine clutched her husband's sleeve. "Charles! Someone's upstairs." Charles squinted into the flashing light, but even his jaw slackened. "There's no one. Don't panic," Daniel cut in, louder now, his voice breaking with forced authority. "It's all staged." "She's bluffing." Yet his own eyes flickered toward the ceiling, just once, betraying unease. Then the faucets shut off abruptly. Silence fell for 2 beats, only to be broken by the voice again, sharper this time. "Trespass documented." Law enforcement notified. Elaine's knees buckled. Charles wrapped both arms around her, dragging her backward. Lydia's hand trembled on her phone. "Call the police," she hissed. "Right now." Through the feed, I watched Daniel's face shift. Arrogance faltered into calculation, but he pulled his phone out anyway, jabbing the screen. Minutes later, headlights washed across the lodge driveway. A county patrol car rolled in, lights spinning, but sirens silent. 2 officers stepped out. My cameras caught it all, their boots crunching gravel, their hands resting on holsters, eyes scanning the scene. I leaned forward, the chipped cup cool now against my palm, heart beating steady. The officers spoke first to Daniel, who launched into an animated explanation, gesturing wildly toward the house. Lydia chimed in, her tone high and defensive. Charles tried to hold Elaine upright. She shook, muttering about voices in the walls. Finally, one officer raised his hand. "All right. Enough." His tone was clipped. He asked for documentation. Daniel produced nothing but bluster. Lydia waved her phone like evidence, but no paper appeared. Then the officer knocked on the front door. My neighbor Ethan had arranged access for them through the system. The strobes ceased. The faucets quieted. The shadows stilled. The lodge looked once more like what it was, a mountain retreat, calm and orderly. The officer stepped inside, scanning, then came back out shaking his head. "House is secured. Nothing illegal, no malfunction we can find." Just a smart system doing its job. Daniel pressed forward, his voice sharp. "But it's ours." "My mom barely uses it. We're entitled." "Stop." The officer cut him off. He pulled a folded document from his clipboard, something I had filed through Margaret days before. Proof of the living trust, notarized, registered with the county. "This property is held in legal trust under Rebecca Hale. Sole authority. No transfer. No ambiguity. You have no claim." The words rang clearer than any siren. Daniel's mouth opened, then shut again. Lydia went pale, her nails digging into her palm. Charles looked down at the suitcases he had dragged onto the porch. Elaine sobbed quietly into his shoulder. The officer's partner stepped closer, his voice lower, meant for Daniel alone, but caught by the microphone feed. "Son, if you force this further, you're not just risking embarrassment. You're risking charges. And trust me, you don't want that." Silence. A long one. Then Daniel yanked the suitcase back, muttering curses under his breath. He avoided the camera's gaze, avoided even looking at the porch light above him. The officers began escorting them toward the SUV. Elaine stumbled once. Charles steadied her. Lydia walked stiffly, chin high but eyes darting. Daniel pulled the hatch open with a jerk and threw the suitcase inside. Then one of the officers turned slightly toward the camera, not realizing I would hear his words as clearly as if he stood beside me. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you've done everything right. Most people don't." The sentence cut straight through me. Not a rebuke, not pity, recognition. Society's acknowledgement that I had drawn the line clean, firm, lawful. On the tablet screen, I watched them pile into the SUV. The engine coughed, then roared. Tires spat gravel as they backed down the drive and disappeared into the trees. The lodge stood still again, bathed in late afternoon light. The shadow on the landing was gone, the faucets quiet, the air calm. My system reset, sensors blinking back to idle. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from release. For years, I had dreaded this exact battle, sure it would crush. Me, sure I would crumble beneath threats of abandonment. But today, the house had defended itself, and the law had defended me. I whispered into the silence. Family does not take property hostage. The echo line landed heavy, true, final. I closed the tablet, picked up the chipped cup again, and held it close. For the first time in a long while, the taste of tea didn't seem bitter. The cameras went still. The lodge returned to silence. But I knew the storm wasn't over. When people lose the battle for something they feel entitled to, they don't vanish. They retreat. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a news alert from the county feed. I didn't click right away, but curiosity won. The headline was small, tucked into the local updates column. Monroe family seen leaving Aspen Lodge after property dispute. A grainy photo showed Charles's SUV pulling away, Lydia's face half hidden in the passenger window. I set the phone down. For most neighbors, it would be gossip, a whisper about greed and entitlement. But for me, it was a reminder that battles never end in the courtroom of opinion. They continue in living rooms, in kitchens, in the quiet places where people lick their wounds. The next day, Ethan called. They're back at the rental on Pine Street. Looks bad I didn't ask how he knew. Ethan had his ways of knowing. Instead, I thanked him and carried the chipped cup to the sink. That night, I let myself imagine what it looked like inside that rental. Charles, shoulders hunched, sitting at a flimsy table meant for temporary tenants. He'd lost his job at the manufacturing plant 6 months ago. The papers I found later confirmed it. He hadn't told many, maybe out of pride. His unemployment checks barely covered groceries. Elaine, pale and tired, her hand resting against her chest the way people do when they want to hide the tremor of their heartbeat. I remembered her laugh at church events years ago when her health had been better. Now, the medication bottles lined up on the counter told a different story. A weak heart, too many pills with names that ended in Ol and Ian. And Lydia, my daughter-in-law, pacing the small living room, phone in her hand, scrolling through social media with a scowl. Her friends had posted photos from ski weekends, from homes bigger than any she'd known growing up. She wanted to keep up. She wanted her parents taken care of. She wanted Daniel to be the man who provided all of it. Pressure like that doesn't excuse cruelty, but it explains the edge in her voice when she'd said, "They need a place." It makes more sense this way I picture Daniel, too. My son. Sitting on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, running his hands through his hair like he used to when he was a boy, trying to solve math problems at the kitchen table. Only this time, the numbers weren't fractions. They were rent, bills, and the taste of humiliation. It would be easier if they were monsters. Monsters are simple. You fight them, you win, you move on. But these were people with cracks and flaws, with desperation that had turned into entitlement. People who had chosen to rob me of dignity because it seemed easier than facing their own failures. I sat in my quiet Denver house, watching the streetlight cast a narrow cone of yellow outside, and felt the ache of that complexity. Part of me wanted to soften, to call, to say, "I'll help with groceries," or "let me cover Elaine's next appointment." The maternal instinct in me, the one that had written checks for Daniel's tuition, his wedding, his first car, whispered that maybe I should give again. But another part of me remembered Margaret's words in her office. Love does not mean saying yes to everything. I remembered the officer's sentence outside the lodge. "Ma'am, you've done everything right. Most people don't." So I didn't call. Instead, I made myself sit with the tension, to feel both sides, to see their humanity and still hold my line. Because the truth was sharp and simple. Need does not excuse theft. Struggle does not entitle you to strip dignity from someone else. I thought back to Richard. Years ago, when Daniel was small, Richard would come home with grease still under his nails from long days of carpentry. He used to say, "Son, there's no shame in asking for help, but there's plenty in stealing it." Daniel must have heard that line 100 times. I wondered now if he had forgotten, or if he had just decided it didn't apply when desperation grew teeth. I could almost hear Richard's laugh if he'd been in that Pine Street rental, shaking his head at the chaos. He would have put a hand on Charles's shoulder, maybe offered to find him side work. He would have reminded Lydia that envy is a poison that eats from the inside. He would have held Elaine's hand gently, patient with her weakness. And he would have pulled Daniel aside, away from the noise, and said, "Don't you dare erase your mother's name from her own door." But Richard wasn't here. It was me. And I wasn't going to step into that rental, into their shadows and justifications. My place was my lodge, my trust, my threshold. Still, as I set the chipped cup back on the shelf, I whispered a prayer, not the holy kind, just a human one. That Charles would find dignity in work again, that Elaine's heart would hold steady, that Lydia would see her worth wasn't in square footage or photos, and that Daniel would remember he had been raised by people who built, not by people who took. The camera feeds of the lodge glowed quietly on the tablet beside me. I had won, yes, but winning isn't clean. Winning leaves residue. It leaves questions that stick to you late at night. Would I forgive them? Could I? Should I? I didn't answer. Not yet. I only knew one thing. They had forced me to say no, and that no had saved me. The house settled into its evening. Sounds, the ones I used to mistake for loneliness. The clock over the stove ticked in a patient rhythm. Heat sighed through the vent by the window. A neighbor's dog barked twice, and then thought better of it. I sat at the kitchen table with my chipped ceramic cup, steam lifting like a thin veil. I wrapped both hands around the heat and felt the pulse slide back into my wrists. Silence used to scare me. It felt like a hallway with no doors. Tonight, it felt like a room with thick walls and a lock I owned. Silence used to be the punishment for speaking. Now it was the answer when noise tried to move me. I took a small sip and let the tea rest on my tongue. Bitter at first, then steadier. The lamp on the sideboard cast a low amber cone across the table. In that light, everything slowed enough to be seen. A water ring on the wood from years ago. A tiny nick I never sanded out. One stray basil leaf clinging to the rim of the cup. The minor imperfections that prove a thing has lived. I listened to my breath rise and fall. I listened to the house return to itself after days of bracing. No televisions, no phone calls, no music. The quiet let smaller truths walk forward. I had done what I feared I could not do. I had said no, and the world had not ended. The lodge was safe. The paper said so. My back believed it. I set the cup down and rested my fingers on the edge of the table. The skin there is thin now, a map of veins under winter light. I thought of Richard sanding the porch rail of the lodge, saying that wood tells you where to press and where to leave it alone. People do too. I had pressed where I needed to. I had left alone what was not mine to fix. On the counter, the mail waited in a neat stack. A grocery flyer, a utility bill, a postcard from the library reminding me a book was due. I sorted them without hurry. The sound of paper sliding over paper soothed me. It was the sound of order returning. I placed the trust folder on top of the stack, not to gloat, just to remember. Some battles are won by signatures and patience. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Somewhere down the block, a car door shut and tires rolled away. I thought about Daniel and felt the ache arrive, honest and clean. He was my son before he was anyone's husband. He was my child before he learned how to make threats he did not fully understand. The ache did not ask me to rush. It asked me to sit, to let grief have its small chair at the table and behave. I whispered to the room, silence used to be the thing between us. Now it is my shelter. The words arrived without drama, only weight. I did not argue with them. I stood and rinsed the cup, running my thumb along the crack that runs from lip to base. I dried it with the soft towel Richard always hung crooked. When I placed the cup back on the table, a small halo of warmth remained on the wood, proof that even brief heat leaves a kindness behind. I watered the basil, pinched one sprig, and held it to my nose. Green, peppery, alive. On the window glass, a faint film showed where my breath met the cold. It looked like a small cloud trying to form. Then it vanished. I smiled at how ordinary a miracle can be. In the hallway, I paused by the closet and touched the old leather album where I had tucked my letter to Richard. I did not take it out. I did not need to read it again. Knowing it was there was enough. A promise folded between pages, steady as a heartbeat you do not have to hear to believe. Back at the table, I opened a small notebook and made a simple list. Not plans, not defenses. Ordinary things. Call the library. Replace the porch bulb. Oil the hinges on the back door. Drive up to Aspen when the weather clears and sit on the porch with tea. I wrote each line with slow letters that did not apologize for their shape. Silence used to be emptiness. Tonight, it was a tool. It made space for duty and for rest. It turned down the volume of panic so that dignity could speak at normal speed. The room approved. I felt it in the way the floor eased under my feet, in the way the air warmed without asking. Before bed, I opened the front door and stepped onto the threshold. The night air was cold. It tuned my lungs. The porch light threw a small circle onto the concrete. Beyond it, the street lay quiet under a thin shine of frost. I looked left and right, as if expecting someone, then realized the only arrival tonight was my own steadiness, showing up at last. I stepped back inside, closed the door gently, and turned the deadbolt. Not because I was afraid, but because I was home. The morning I signed the papers, Denver carried that strange stillness that comes after a light snowfall. The sky was pale, almost metallic, and the air smelled of iron. I carried my leather folder under one arm, the one that held every deed, tax receipt, and trust document connected to the lodge. My boots crunched faintly on the walkway to Margaret's office, and for the first time in months, I felt like my steps had direction rather than hesitation. Margaret's office sat on the corner of Colfax, a modest building with dark windows that reflected more sky than street. Inside, the air was warm, lined with the faint smell of paper and lemon polish. Margaret herself looked up from her desk, glasses halfway down her nose, and greeted me with that steady calm I had come to trust. "Rebecca," she said, standing to shake my hand. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "I am. Let's get this done." She gestured toward the long conference table. A neat stack of papers waited in the center, clipped at the corner, marked with yellow tabs for my signature. At the top of the stack lay the deed transfer to Hope Horizon Foundation, the nonprofit that built retreats for veterans and their families. Margaret had explained it all the week before, but seeing the document there, ink crisp and permanent, made it real in a way that words could not. I slid into the chair and rested the folder beside me. Margaret sat across, folding her hands. "Once you sign, Rebecca, the lodge becomes their property. But as we've outlined, your life estate clause ensures you keep access for as long as you live. No one, not even your son, can interfere. It's airtight." I touch the pen. "Good. Because this isn't me losing the lodge. This is me choosing who will have it." Margaret gave a small, approving smile. "That's the spirit of this. You're not giving it up. You're directing it forward." The pen scratched across the first page, my signature flowing steadier than I expected. With each stroke, a weight lifted. Not the sorrow, not the ache of Daniel's betrayal, but the gnawing uncertainty that had sat on my chest for months. By the third signature, my hand no longer trembled. By the fifth, I felt a quiet satisfaction bloom. Margaret guided me through each step: the trust reinforcement, the gift deed, the donative intent letter. Finally, the rider granting me lifetime access, the one clause that mattered to me most. She tapped the line with her manicured nail. "This ensures the lodge is still yours to use, to breathe in, to remember Richard." They cannot touch that I signed, sat back, and let the silence of the room settle. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the heating vent and the faint scratch of Margaret filing the papers into her leather portfolio. "It's done," she said. I exhaled slowly. "So, if Daniel calls another lawyer?" "He'll hit a wall," she said plainly. "An irrevocable one. Family emotion won't bend the law here. You've protected the lodge in the strongest way possible." I nodded, then reached into my bag and pulled out the small, cracked ceramic cup I had carried like a talisman. I set it gently on the table. "This cup reminds me what can break and still hold together." The lodge is like that. It may have been cracked by betrayal, but now it's sealed in a way even my son can't undo. Margaret's eyes softened. That's a powerful way to see it. I picked the cup up again, cradling it. Richard used to say a home isn't just where you live. It's what you protect. Today I've protected it. Not for Daniel, not even for me, but for those who'll walk in needing peace more than ownership. When the last copy was stamped and notarized, Margaret handed me the envelope. "These are yours. Keep them safe. This is your armor now." I tucked the envelope into my folder and stood. My legs felt steady, like roots had finally found the soil again. As I walked out into the crisp Denver air, the wind pressed against my coat, sharp, but clean. For months, I had thought my only choices were surrender or fight. Today, I realized there was another path. Redefine the terms. They thought they could erase me from my own property. Instead, I wrote myself into its future in ink that no storm could wash away. Back in the car, I sat for a long moment, watching my breath cloud the windshield. The phone lay on the seat beside me, silent. I knew Daniel would call soon, demanding, accusing, maybe even pleading. But the papers were already filed, the transfer already irreversible. His words would hit a wall of law thicker than any anger. I whispered to myself, letting the words settle like stone. I did not lose the lodge. I chose who would inherit it. The thematic echo landed deep in my chest, a line I knew I would carry to the end. I started the engine, the quiet purr steady under my hands. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead felt like mine again. It was late afternoon when the knock came. Denver light always turns softer near dusk, almost forgiving, but my chest tightened as I walked to the door. Through the glass pane, I saw him, Daniel, standing alone, his shoulders hunched against the chill. No Lydia, no in-laws, just my son, the boy I once cradled, now a man who had nearly erased me from my own life. I opened the door slowly. He didn't speak right away. His eyes flicked past me into the living room, landing on the small round table by the window where my cracked ceramic cup sat, the same one I had carried into Margaret's office. He noticed it, I could tell, because his throat moved in a swallow. "Mom," he finally said, his voice rough, "I thought you'd always choose me." I let the silence hold for a moment. Old habits would have rushed me to reassure him, to smooth things over, but I stood still this time. My hand rested on the edge of the door, steady. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I did choose you. Every check I wrote, every favor I agreed to, every time I said yes, when no was aching in my throat. I was choosing you. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's fear. And I'm done living in fear." He shook his head, tears welling, his jaw tight. I didn't think you'd actually stop me." I stepped back so he could see me fully, not hidden behind the door. "I didn't stop you to punish you. I stopped you because if I let you take the lodge, you'd never learn where the line is. I chose to teach you what boundaries mean. So one day, if you're wise enough, you can build your own." His eyes dropped to the floor, to the scuffed wood where years of footsteps had carved faint trails. When he looked up again, there were tears. Not a flood, not the kind that begged for comfort, but the silent kind that speaks of recognition. "I thought you'd never shut the door on me," he whispered. I exhaled slowly. I didn't shut the door. I marked where the doorway is. You'll decide if you walk through it, and how he rubbed the back of his neck like he used to when he was a teenager caught in a lie. For a moment, the distance between us wasn't mother and grown man, but mother and boy again. One who had run too far into the dark and didn't quite know how to return. The silence stretched, thick but not hostile. I poured it with, meaning, letting him feel it. He finally met my gaze. His voice cracked. "I was wrong, Mom." I didn't answer right away. The old me would have leapt on those words, clutched them like a lifeline. Instead, I gave him the gift of not rushing, of letting them breathe. "You hurt me deeply," I said at last, "and you'll have to find your own way to heal what you broke." But hearing those words, it matters. He nodded, shoulders slumping. A tear slipped down, and he wiped it with the back of his hand, almost ashamed. I don't expect you to forgive me now. You don't need to expect it, I said. Forgiveness is a door I'll open if and when it's right. What matters is you stopped trying to break the lock. We stood there, two people bound by blood, separated by choices, tethered still by something harder to name. Not reconciliation, not yet. But a crack in the wall, a small opening where light could seep through. Daniel's voice softened, the anger gone. Will I ever get to see the lodge again? I glanced at the cup on the table, the thin crack glinting faintly in the fading light. The lodge isn't mine to give you anymore. I made sure of that, but one day, when you've learned what home really means, maybe you'll stand in a place of your own and understand why I did this. That will be enough. He nodded, lips pressed tight. Then, without another word, he turned slightly, as if unsure whether to step forward into the living room or back down the porch. He stayed just long enough to let me see his tears fall once more. Then he turned, walking slowly to his car. I didn't follow. I watched him go, my hand on the doorframe. When his taillights disappeared into the Denver dusk, I whispered, not to him, not to Richard, not even to myself, but to the quiet. The door is here. He'll know where to find it. And then I closed it, gently, not in finality, but in truth. The mountain air felt clean enough to keep. Patches of late snow clung to the edges of the pines when I turned into the gravel drive and saw the small banner strung across the rail. Hope Horizon Foundation. Below it, a folding table held coffee in silver urns and paper cups lined like patient soldiers. A handful of staff stood in jackets and knit hats, cheeks pink from the wind. The lodge looked the same as ever, cedar and stone catching the light. The porch, ready the way a good porch always is. Dana Ortiz waited by the steps, hands tucked into her coat, hair pulled into a low knot. She is the foundation's program director, a woman whose eyes take in a room the way a nurse reads a vital sign. She stepped forward when I parked, and the steadiness in her smile told me I had placed the lodge in the right hands. Mrs. Hail, she said, and her voice had warmth without performance. Thank you for making the drive. Thank you for making this place matter, I answered. Inside, a few board members stood near the mantel with cardboard, tubes of rolled certificates. Volunteers arranged chairs in a loose semicircle, and a young man tested a small microphone that did not want to behave. The house held them easily. I ran my fingers along the banister Richard had sanded smooth years ago, then let them fall. This moment belonged to the foundation now. I had chosen that. We kept the ceremony small. Dana welcomed everyone with simple words about rest and repair. No trumpet, no donor pageantry, just a clear statement of purpose. A chaplain offered a brief blessing, secular enough to cover everyone. The county clerk had already recorded the transfer. The paper sat in my folder like a quiet engine. Paperwork justice does not need applause to work. Dana invited me to say something. I am not a speechmaker, but a few sentences found me. I told them the lodge had been built by two sets of hands and a marriage that carried its share of storms. I said a home survives by the boundaries that keep it true. I said that today did not feel like loss. It felt like direction. The words were plain. They were enough. After the clapping thinned out, Dana took my arm and guided me toward the entryway. A small plaque had been mounted beside the door, brushed steel on a cedar backer. In clean lettering, it read, "Gifted, by Rebecca Hale in memory of Richard Hale. May this house be a quiet kind of healing. I traced the first R with my fingertip and felt an ache that did not demand tears, just acknowledgement. We walked the rooms together. Dana listened as I pointed out the kitchen drawer that sticks in damp weather and the best shelf for tea, the one that does not warm from the stove. She asked where the morning light falls in winter and where the floorboards creak after a long day. She took notes as if these small facts were instructions for tending a living thing. I suppose they are. On the porch, the weather lifted enough for us to sit. I brought the chipped ceramic cup from my bag and held it while the wind combed the trees. Dana watched the cup and then looked at me in that way women reserve for one another when the story beneath the story does not need explanation. "Mrs. Hale," she said, voice low, "women like us often give everything and get erased. Today, you gave, but you were not erased." The sentence went through me like a key turning. I thought of Daniel on my doorstep, of Lydia's measured defiance, of Charles with his boarding house suitcase, and Elaine with her hand at her chest. I thought of the two deputies in the driveway, one of them telling the camera I had done everything right. I thought of Margaret sliding the deed across the table, of Ethan labeling a wire with a strip of blue tape. I thought of Richard on this same porch with his tea, telling me the house would outlast us. The line Dana offered did not change any of it, but it framed it. I nodded. I let the truth land. Below the porch, the lake held a hard shine where the ice had given up in a ragged oval. The wind came around and lifted the hair at my temple. Behind us, a laugh rose from the kitchen where a volunteer figured out the tricky burner and the coffee finished its hiss. The house was already working, already holding people the way a good host does, quietly, without keeping score. Dana told me about the first group scheduled for spring. Couples, mostly. One mother and daughter learning how to talk again. Two brothers who stop breathing right when they sleep. She said they would keep occupancy small, keep the days unscripted, make room for walks and naps and silence. I told her the trail to the South Ridge holds the sweetest pine scent after rain. She wrote it down like a prescription. A staffer stepped out to snap a photo for the foundation's page. I do not love pictures, but I stood with Dana by the rail and let the shutter click. In the frame, I held the cracked cup. It made me look like a woman with a talisman. Maybe I am. When the guests thinned and the banner came down, I stayed on the porch a few extra minutes. Dana returned with 2 paper cups, one for each of us, and we drank while the cold worked at our cheeks. She asked if I would come up sometimes when groups were not scheduled. I told her yes. The life estate clause is ink, but it is also permission to keep breathing here. I will honor it by using it, not by hoarding it. As the day folded into evening, the lodge looked exactly as it always had, and completely altered. Ownership had migrated, but meaning had not. The foundation had the keys. I had my name where it mattered. I sat with that paradox and found it kind. Before I left, Dana pressed a small envelope into my hand. Inside was a note on the foundation's letterhead. Nothing legal, just words. Thank you for trusting us. We will carry the story forward with care. It felt like a promise, and I realized how few promises ask nothing in return. Back at my car, I turned to take one more look. The porch light had not yet clicked on. The windows reflected the sky. I held the cup and thought of every morning Richard and I sat here talking about nothing that turned out to be everything. I whispered the thematic line I had been repeating for weeks, only this time it sounded less like defense and more like design. I did not lose the lodge. I chose who would have it. The wind answered by pushing a thin wave across the lake, as if the water agreed. I climbed in, set the cup in the holder, and started the engine. The road out curved through the pines that have watched over our years. For a moment, I drove slowly, letting the house shrink in the mirror. Then I faced forward and gave the car a little gas. The porch chair holds me the way it always has, cedar arms smooth under my palms, mountain air clean and thin in my lungs. Late light lays a gold ribbon across the boards. When I turn my head, the brushed steel plaque catches it and answers. Given in memory of Richard Hale. May this lodge be a quiet kind of healing, I read it once, then again, and something inside me unclenches, not loudly, but for good. I set my cracked ceramic cup on the rail and let the steam curl up into the cold. The lake below is a sheet of soft metal. Pines lean, listen, then settle back. Somewhere inside, a volunteer laughs at a stubborn burner. The sound drifts out and dissolves into the air. The lodge breathes like a living thing. It was always alive, I think. It only needed boundaries to keep its pulse. Richard used to sit right here, his knee touching mine, waiting for me to hand him tea. He would point at the ridgeline and tell me where the weather was hiding. He believed a porch could mend people if they stayed on it long enough. I did not understand then how a house can teach you to hold your ground. Now I do. Sometimes a structure stands tall, so the person who built it remembers how. I touched the plaque with 2 fingers, the way you touch the name of someone you love on cool stone. The words feel plain, almost stern. Quiet kind of healing. Not fireworks, not applause. Just room to breathe after the noise shuts off. I think of the officer in the driveway that day, how he glanced toward the camera I was watching and said, "Ma'am, you've done everything right." Most people don't. I did not know I needed a stranger to say it. I did. His sentence moved a weight I had been carrying for years. Down the hall, the kitchen drawer will still stick when the weather turns damp. The west window will still glow first in winter. The good shelf for tea will still stay cool. Dana wrote down all those small instructions as if they were medical orders. Margaret wrote the larger orders into paper and statute, her pen turning air into armor. Ethan gave the house a voice so it could speak law when my throat felt tired. Each of them turned love into a task. That is my kind of love. I think about the letter I tucked into the old album at home, the one that begins with his name and ends with my initial. It lives there now, folded between photos that smell like cedar and summers that will not come back. I do not need to read it again. Writing it was the work. It told the truth I had been walking around, that saying no is not a failure of care. It is the form care takes when you are finally done with fear. A wind shifts and sends a penny-colored shimmer across the lake. My hand finds the cup, warms again. Daniel might drive up someday and stand at the foot of these stairs. He might keep his distance and ask nothing. He might ask for something I cannot give. I am not rehearsing an answer. The door to me is not locked. It is simply no longer a revolving one. He can come as a son, not as a claimant. He can bring questions, not threats. If he wants to sit and breathe this air, he will earn it by understanding what a threshold means. Inside, a timer dings. Someone remembers the cookies. Someone else thanks the person who baked them. the house is already busy with small kindnesses. Ownership shifted, but purpose did not. Purpose is what stays when the names on paper change. I hold that thought until it warms my sternum and travels out into my shoulders. I stand and walk to the edge of the porch. The first two boards creak in the old, honest way. I look down at the gravel where the SUV once stopped, where fear tried to turn into force. The gravel looks ordinary again. That feels right. I am not interested in a shrine to conflict. This place is for the ordinary holy things: sleep, coffee, the slow, clean breath you take after you put the heavy box down. I pick up the cup, take one careful sip, and smile at the little sting on my tongue. I used to think peace would arrive on a trumpet. Turns out it arrives in filings and signatures, in neighbors who wire a gentle alarm, in a lawyer who is more steel than sympathy, in a foundation that knows how to hold a story without dropping it. It arrives as the steadiness to sit still when someone beats on your door with ultimatums. It arrives as a slow smile you own. I look once more at the plaque and say the line out loud so the house can hear it too. I do not need a loud victory. I only need to know I kept my peace, by paperwork, by wisdom, and by a slow smile. Before we say goodbye, we would love to know where you are watching from. Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Tell us in the comments. We read every message with gratitude. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not only to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember this simple truth. Sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and we will see you in the next story.